All right, welcome back to RSReplay. I'm excited to welcome Jared Pinter, who's just joined us as a writer at Russell Street Report and is joining us on the pod for the first time. Jared, great to have you. Thanks for coming.
Man, thank you so much for having me on Russell Street Replay. I cannot wait to get this episode started. We got a really
Yeah,
big division. Oh, sorry, we got a really big divisional game to talk about today, and I can't wait.
yeah, huge win to stay atop of the division. I think that's big, and it was an ugly win, as I mentioned in the kind of in the preview and in the title. They're only playing ugly games this season, but it when they lose an ugly game, it feels like the sky's falling. When they win an ugly game, you're just like, thank God we got through that. Let's get to next week. And I think one of the big questions to start off with today is, is it time for Greg Roman to leave? I know this is like a hot topic seemingly every week. But I think this week really highlighted for me, the 16 passing attempts, the inability to get a rhythm going in the passing game, weird usage of Bateman and Duvernay. I feel like I'm not one of those people who goes nuts when I see Ricard on the field. I think he brings plenty of value and, was really important to our offense. But it's just weird when it doesn't seem like there's even an emphasis on the passing game, especially early in the season when they were passing so much on early downs to a lot of success. And so it feels like they've gone away from that a bit. Lamar doesn't seem like he's as comfortable passing the ball as he should be. So I don't know if it's a change at coordinator that changes things. I think they'll have the chance to think about it after this Tampa Bay game with the mini bye, then the Monday night game against the Saints, and then the full bye after that. But as of right now, where do you stand with Greg Roman?
Man, that is a really, really interesting question. Short to the point, I do think that this offense has just hit a wall. It's like a mental wall with this offense. Like we've seen the peak of it in 2019 when they were the NFL's premier offense, but we've just seen it go down and down and down. And you can blame injuries for that for 2020. They were hurt offensive line for 2020. They were destroyed in terms of an offensive line in 2021. You can really blame injuries for that. But this year, they've been really healthy on the offensive line. Ever since getting Stanley back, they've had the dudes that they drafted, that they planned for out there. And I think a lot of those players have certainly looked the part as pass blockers. But as we get into, they're oddly not good at run blocking, which is just so awkward. And then we just talk about like the scheme designs. There was a little bit of unluckiness to that. There were checkdowns in yesterday's game. Lamar probably should have hit that one to Drake in the flat. JOK made a really nice athletic play to get over there and bat the ball down. If JOK doesn't bat that ball down, that's 6. So, that's another thing we have to talk about, player execution. Here's my thing with Roman. He's not the problem solver. And if you're not the problem solver, then why are you really here? And you mentioned like the long bye about Harbaugh thinking about that. Well, they've had all off season to think about this. They could have easily let him go. They built this offense for Greg Roman. They believe in this offense. So unless it's going to be like a 2012 Ravens thing where like they just feel like that they can't get more out of this offense, I think they do let him go. But I do think it's going to take a lot of internal thinking, and I don't think it's going to be something that's going to happen, very soon. I think this organization is if it's anything, it's not only is it loyal, but it also takes a very long time to get decisions done because they are so loyal, because they have this kind of, loyalty factor to them where coaches and coordinators get second and third chances. I do think an offensive coordinator change probably is needed. In terms of who that would be, I think it's pretty easy. You've heard on Ravens Twitter, either T. Martin or Keith Williams could do the job. They've been the wide receiving coaches for the Ravens. They're very highly respected in that building. You listen to the young wide receivers talk about them. They love them as coaches. I think one of them might have even gotten an interview for an offensive. T. Martin, yeah, that's right. You're right. Got an interview for another team. I think it was the Bills,
actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was the Bills who interviewed him. So these guys can I think if the Bills are calling you about a potential offensive coordinator spot, obviously he didn't get the job, but if they're even interested, this guy is clearly knows what he's doing. He would probably know how to do it, how to call an offense, and I just
I think
I
he's
think it's ready.
Yeah, I think he spent enough time in Baltimore that he could run the offense. And that last point you said, I think it's time for this offense to evolve. Not that I think it's clear that what Greg Roman built works. It can find success in the NFL, it can get your team to the playoffs, but is it going to win you shootouts? No. Is it going to counter this wave of cover two defenses? No, because they're still going to stack the box against your offense, even if they're playing cover two against Pat Mahomes. And you're not finding new ways to exploit the defense. You're doing the same thing a lot. And while I like some of the wrinkles he's thrown in, I agree. I think it's just gotten stale. And part of that is just he's been here for so long. He's very comfortable. Like you've said, they're loyal. He's very comfortable in his position. And so there isn't the need for a lot of change from him. The only way change happens is if there's a personnel change. And to your point, I think if they make a midseason change, I think T. Martin is the guy. He can call plays. He knows the offense. And like you said, that connection he has with the receivers is huge because he knows their strengths and he knows. Sometimes I don't think Roman necessarily always knows, other really than Duvernay and occasionally Bateman, what to do with his receivers. He's got Prochet, he's got Wallace, ways to free them up and use them as best as they can be used. So I feel like he's not necessarily as good at getting his guys in the best position to succeed. But if they're not going to fire, if they want to fire Roman and replace him with T. Martin, if they're already kind of thinking that, I think it should happen this year. I think it should happen sooner rather than later. But I think if they're looking around the league, if they're looking for someone, I think Brian Johnson, the Eagles QB coach, is a guy who's been mentioned a handful of times as a guy who should be a coordinator sometime soon. And if they're targeting someone from around the league, then I don't think it makes sense to fire Roman midseason and install T as your interim and then replace him because I think T is – I think eventually you're going to lose him if you do it that way. So I'm torn on getting rid of Roman right away. I think this game against the Bucs will be another good test to see because you also have to, like you say, they built this offense around Roman and they don't have wide receivers because Roman. And so if T. Martin comes in, this is we're going to be right up against the buy. We're going to be right up against the trade deadline. But if it's, we want T. Martin in, well, do we like our receivers? Do we want to get another guy? Because if it's Roman, I just don't see us making an acquisition at receiver if Roman's still our coordinator. On the other side of the ball, though, Mike Macdonald, led his team. I think the Browns were 2 of 11 or 2 of 12 on third down. They forced a few turnovers. It felt like there were stretches in this game when the defense was just absolutely dominant against what is a good Browns rushing game that was still pretty active, but overall felt like we were shutting them down on some drives, and especially on key plays. But then other drives, and even on those drives when we got stops, it felt like it took a while for us to get there. It felt like, the Browns came out and had an 11-play touchdown drive. Then they had a field goal on their second drive. And then we forced them to 3 punts in a row. And then in the second half, we forced a fumble, and then it was decently long drive for field goal, pretty quick drive for a touchdown, and then the field goal block that was right before the end of the game. And so it feels like they're just very streaky on defense within games. They'll have these periods where they're getting walked up and down the field, and then they will force 2 3-and-outs in a row and a turnover in the next 3 drives. Kind of maddening. First, what do you think that says? First, what are your impressions of Mike Macdonald? We're 7 weeks in. I think it's probably a pretty good point to start evaluating his performance over a larger sample size. And 2, what do you think, if anything, needs to really change about this defense?
All right. Well, answer your first question. Mike Macdonald's definitely a little bit different than some of the other coordinators that the Ravens have had on defense. Usually those guys are usually a little bit older, a little bit more seasoned. I think we have to realize that this is Mike McDaniel's first defensive coordinator job in the NFL. He's always been around NFL teams, but he's never had an NFL defensive coordinator job. So this is his first gig. He's had other defensive coordinator jobs in college. He was Michigan's defensive coordinator last year, but he hasn't really. What I think the weird thing about him is that, I was expecting a little bit more, like a little bit more blitzes. It's weird because I feel like last year we got the worst side of the coin when it comes to the blitzes. Always blitzing, always going full gas, always never really putting down that, always putting the pedal to the metal, per se. And you saw it all the time, it hurt us. We didn't have the corners to play that kind of defense. We just didn't have it, and Wink couldn't stop doing it. It was like he was addicted to it. And I think it's one of the reasons why he got fired was because he again, like we said with Roman, it's the inability to make an adjustment. I think with Mike Mack, as the players call him, a little bit different. It's like the opposite, where like I feel like he can get exotic with the blitzes. We saw it with one of their sacks. Geno Stone, Patrick Queen, I think another linebacker was coming on a blitz, but they sent it from different angles. Queen was coming through the C gap, another person was going through the B, and they had Stone coming off the edge. So it was like pressure on pressure on pressure on Jacoby Brissett. He just got sent into a pressure cooker. That is an excellent blitz because you have different pieces coming at you all at once. And when you have that, the quarterback has to make a decision immediately. Like that ball's got to come out, either check down or throw it away and live to die another down. Brissett didn't want to do that. He tried to extend the play, get sacked. I think it was Kyle Hamilton was the other blitzer with Queen and Stone.
Hamilton was the one lined up over the B gap who just swam right by their guard, which is kind of crazy to watch him do as a safety. I think Macdonald is a lot more flexible than Wink Martindale. His his blitzes aren't as he's not running as many cover 0, cover 1 blitzes. He tends to do a lot of fire zone blitzes, a lot of overloads that have replacement linebackers or linemen dropping into coverage on the other side of the overload. It's like it's a fully thought out play. It seems like with Wink Martindale sometimes he would have a half thought out play. It would be let's get to the quarterback. But he wouldn't be thinking as much about the back end of the play. He would just hope that he can get to the quarterback and, his corners would be able to contain long enough. And instead, Macdonald's thinking, okay, let me get to the quarterback, but let me make sure that he can't immediately beat me out of it with a quick slant or something like that. Let me drop, my linebacker on the other side right into that spot. And I think that he's a lot more flexible in his game plan, like you said. And yeah, 7 weeks in, I couldn't be happier really with what he's done. He's taken a really talented unit. He's contended with a few injuries. He's went up against some good offenses and held pretty firm. And, they had a pretty disappointing game on run defense yesterday. I feel like, usually we're able to contain Chubb, and he was breaking tackles and really just making a mess of things yesterday. I think that's one of the reasons they were really able to keep the ball and drive and extend those long drives. And I'm sure that's going to be something he's focusing on in coaching. But in this league, it really is, your third downs. Are you able to get off the field on third down? Can you shut down the other team's passing offenses? Can you get pressure? And they did those things, not as effectively necessarily as they did to the Bengals and the Bills, which are both better offenses. But overall, not a bad game. So I'm pretty encouraged with where this defense is headed under his leadership. Moving on to our categories for the week, our awards. First one is Raven of the Game. And I think this one's tough to hand out to anyone not named Gus Edwards, just because he came coming back from his injury. There was a lot of concern in the building about whether or not he was going to play football again this summer, just because of the state of his knee and how badly it was damaged. And for him to not only come back ahead of what most people expect to be his return timeline, but be able to take on a full load basically the first game and do really well with it was just so encouraging to see.
Yeah, it is tough to really give it to anybody else. I do want to shout out two people in particular. They both play the same position. Patrick Queen and Malik Harrison are two inside linebackers. They have been playing out of their minds lately. So I do want to give them a little bit of a shout out. Obviously, Harrison's a huge play came on special teams yesterday. He blocked the punt. Didn't really block it, kind of hit him in his face. A little bit of a weird scenario, but he blocked it. He gets credit for the block. And Patrick Queen on that one drive where Stout pins him back at I think it was the 10. Mm-hmm. Patrick Queen on two back-to-back plays comes screaming out of nowhere to take down Kareem Hunt on back-to-back plays, back-to-back tackles for losses. He's really been playing well. I know PFF grades are awkward. like they're not the end all be all. They're not like the Bible where like you have to listen to everything they say. But he has, whatever for this means, he has been one of the highest rated Ravens defenders for the last 4 games. So he's definitely been playing well. But again, Gus, just whatever he's been going through, he's been going through so much. He took the extra time. Unlike Dobbins, who rushed, I feel like he might have rushed back a little bit. But Gus definitely, took those 4 extra games, and he's really in. You can tell he kind of worked really hard to get into shape. He looks really skinny, oddly. Like he looked like he dropped like 15, 20 pounds or something. He looked skinny. He looked really. He looked like he looked powerful yesterday. He looked amazing.
Yeah, you mentioned Harrison and Queen. I think it's worth noting. You mentioned their PFF grades. They're 3rd and 4th in the last 3 weeks of PFF grades. Queen is 3rd and Harrison is 4th in PFF grades. And again, say what you will about PFF grades, whether or not they're accurate. I think sometimes they ding linebackers for things they shouldn't. But the fact that they're putting up these grades really shows that they're making a lot of improvements. And back in 2020, when they got drafted, it really felt like the Ravens were trying to find their next linebacker duo for their future. And 3 years later, contracts and stuff are all going to be another issue to play out. But it does feel like this year and next year, they really do have a solid quarterback there. And I don't really hear a lot of calls to be adding Roquan Smith anymore. So you mentioned Malik Harrison getting that field goal block, which is my Mile High Miracle play of the week. I'm sure there's a few other we want to shout out, but I want to focus in on that play first because it very much reminded me last year of the game last year against the Colts. When you needed a field goal block, you had to have it in that moment. There was nothing else you could do in that moment but get a field goal block. And the Ravens did, and I have to go back and watch this again from the right angles, but I'm pretty sure they called the same play or a very similar play to what they did last year. It involves bunching, I believe, Calais Campbell, Broderick Washington, and I think Brent Urban. Those 3 guys kind of over the long snapper, just to the right of him, him and the 2 guys right, and they bunch the 3 of them together to try and get this like triangle going, penetrating in, and then they have those guys all get their hands up, and then they have the linebackers or whoever's right behind them try and use that attack as a way to get in behind and get close enough to get the angle to the ball, and that's exactly what happened. That is exactly how that play played out. They used Campbell as the fulcrum of the attack, and Harrison rushed behind to Phil and got his head in there. And this team drives me crazy sometimes because they use roster spots on Delshon Phillips and AJ Klein for special team purposes. And I get the value of special teams. I don't always get the roster spots that they take up. And then they go and pull off something like this, and John Harbaugh gets a pass for whatever special team shenanigans he wants to pull for the rest of the season, because they're the only team in the NFL to me that can dial up a play call and say, we're going to block this field goal using this play and actually pull it off. I just don't feel like that's as common a thing in the NFL, and they deserve their laurels for it. What other highlights did you have?
Yeah, a couple of defensive plays. Calais Campbell's force fumble on the sack that Adafiowe picked up. That was a huge play. Justin Houston got a couple of sacks. On that, this is not going to be still up in the stat sheet. The play that forced the field goal. Jacoby Brissett breaks that Houston sack. Adafiowe does not give up. Chases Jacoby Brissett out, makes him go out of bounds, which forces the Browns to go for that field goal. If he does not get that, look back at the play. There was nobody in front of Jacoby Brissett. I don't know if he would have gotten the first down, but Adafiowe did not quit. That's not obviously something like that may not be able to make it into a miracle play, but that's an important effort. It's an effort football play. And for Adafiowe to do that really showed that this dude's really high motor. Like the dude never quits. On offense, man, an impact play. Devin Duvernay's leaping catch in the first quarter was really nice. Lamar had
him make that play and then not really get the touches that it just, again, continues to feel like he should get. He is a beast with the ball in his hands. And Greg Roman talked last week about having an exclamation point next to his game because he didn't get Duvernay involved enough. Well, Duvernay had 3 targets, one of which most of his yards came on that 31-yard catch. He had no carries. And otherwise, his main other play was on a return. Literally every time he touched the ball, he was doing something good. Even when he was blocking, when he was a decoy, he was being really effective. And so that has got to change. And that to me is one of the big frustrations with Roman. The other play I want to highlight is that 4th and 1 toss to Lamar, which was a hell of a ballsy call to me from Greg Roman, because it's proof that Greg Roman really does not like read Twitter or care about what people say at him after the game. Because if the Ravens did a Mark Andrews to Lamar Jackson toss on 4th and 1 and didn't get it, the world would have exploded. And I think, one, they worked on it and he made sure the play was perfect, and he made sure he had the right personnel, like Justice Hill, who's a good blocker for a running back, and was just like, look, we're struggling. Our offense is struggling. We're not able to get the ball to Mark Andrews. Let's get the ball into the hands of our best players. Who do I trust to make this pitch? Mark Andrews. He's a good decoy. They had a read option with Mark Andrews they pulled off earlier in the game just to try to get him involved, which is good. But then where is it with Duvernay? Some of that inconsistency is frustrating. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Going back to that Campbell sack, OA chasing it down, it really was a defensive day. There's also Geno Stone's forced fumble that ended the game, even though the game was probably going to end on that play anyway. It was still nice to see him kind of end it with an exclamation point. But I think we can definitely agree that field goal block really embodies Mile High Miracle.
Yeah.
Moving on to the Back to Practice award. This one's a tough one again for the reasons we talked about. Lamar didn't have a great game. He also didn't have much of a chance to have a great game. They only dropped back to he only passed 16 times. The protection was not as good as it has been. And a lot of times the Ravens kept so many guys in protection that there just weren't any guys open downfield. Guys downfield were double and triple covered a lot. So it's hard to really point out Lamar as a key issue in this game. I felt like he did a good job protecting the ball and not throwing picks. What do you have? Like, it's tough to put your finger on what specifically ails this team. You could say tackling, but I don't think I'm going to do that when they're playing Nick Chubb. I think you mentioned before we got on the pod, maybe you could talk about it here, the kind of alternating drives or the streakiness of this defense a little bit, and where you think that may come from.
Yeah. The alternating drives, I do think it does come from, you mentioned we're not going to talk about tackling. I don't know what it, like, how hard is it to make a tackle? Like, I understand Nick Chubb is excellent, but
so hard.
I understand it's hard, but like, I don't know, man. Like maybe they're like trying to go for the football all the time, but there's missed tackles, but I think the execution and the play calling on Mike Mack's side can be a little bit questionable. And it's not a little bit, it can be very questionable. 3rd and long, why are we playing cover 4? Soft zones? Are you kidding me? I think it was like a really long 3rd down that they hit Amari Cooper with. You can see on the TV like replay just how far Marcus Peters is away from Cooper, because he has to like backpedal back and get back, because that's like the type of defense that they're playing. Like, why not just keep everything in front of you? Why not play man coverage? Like, I don't know. Like, I think that's the one thing that I think Mac needs to get a little bit better at having a little bit of a better feel for the game. Maybe if they are gashing you at the front, maybe you do bring in those bigger bodies up front. Maybe you do take a linebacker off the field. Maybe you do bring in, a Kyle Hamilton down towards the box. That's what I think he can do a little bit better. It's like trying to mix up his defense a little bit more to get that perfect balance of like the fantastic, exciting drives that we have with a little bit more disciplined in the solid drives for the defense and for the offense. This offensive line has to play better. Blocking was really disappointing yesterday. I was very disappointed with a lot of the run blocking yesterday. It just felt like there was just nothing for the backs to do. Like, it felt like the backs were making a lot of the work for themselves. Like, sometimes there were big gaps, sometimes there were like big moments, but like others, it just felt like that, they're fighting for their life back there in that field. Like, I think there were a couple of plays in the second quarter where, like, like Alex Smith, the mid third round player at a UAB, was making plays off the edge on blocked. I'm like, come on, man. Like, that's a certified come on, man moment. Like what are we doing here? Like, with this run blocking. I don't know if this is a scheme issue. I don't know if this is a player's issue. That's something that I would really have to hammer in with the tape. But I'm sort of a little I'm no, I'm not sort of. I'm pretty disappointed with this run blocking, especially because the Browns came in with this defense with such a bad run stopping grade. They were one of the worst defenses at stopping the run, and it felt like that there weren't a lot of lanes for the backs, and I just came away disappointed.
Yeah, and it's weird again, like you mentioned, this is not a good run defending Browns team. They do not have much beef in the middle of their line, and it felt like the middle of the line was where the run blocking struggled more. Ronnie Stanley has been a huge boost to this run blocking game. I felt like Patrick McCarry, when he relieved Morgan Moses in the fourth quarter, I just think he gives us more at right tackle than Moses does right now. And it was the middle. It was Powers. It was Zeitler. Linderbaum to a certain extent, although I still feel like he is playing his butt off, although he did allow his first sack of his career this week. But it was weird because last year it felt like the run blocking and the pass blocking weren't really there from the middle. It feels like Powers and Zeitler are a lot better at their pass blocking this year, but their movement on the straight run game, when they're just straight down blocking or they're just straight zone blocking, when they're not pulling, basically, it just seems like these guys are struggling a little bit more. And I don't think it's a schematic thing. I think partially it's the fatigue of the run game, of constantly launching forward into guys instead of having more drop backs when, as a pass protector. As a tackle, I think the run blocking game might be a little bit easier, but as a guard, I don't think you don't have to move as much if you're pass blocking as a guard. And so it's, I think, a little bit easier than having to launch forward and really move the point of attack forward. So I'm not concerned about it long term. I think we really have a lot of good pieces on this O-line now. And so I'm hoping this was more of just a one-game blip, but it is something to note. Also, game plan-wise, are teams able to find tendencies and get in there? Next award, welcome to the Flock Award. And this one's starting to get a little weird because we keep having our free agents go down. We've lost probably our three major free agents we've lost for an extended amount of time, two of them for the year. And Morgan Moses is also banged up. And so this is kind of a tough award to hand out. But I think I'm going to go in a fairly straightforward direction to it and just give it to the first pick that we had in this year's draft, Kyle Hamilton. He has, I think a lot of people have been expecting him to really step up into the starting safety role with Marcus Williams out. And I think we knew before, when Marcus Williams went down, pretty quickly, that it wasn't going to be the case that Kyle Hamilton was just going to be the starting safety now. They've gone with Geno Stone, and I think we can talk about him a little bit later. They've gone with Stone at free safety, and they've made Hamilton more of a playmaker. They've used him down in the box. He's done some work in single high, but I think for the most part, he's been doing a lot of playing in the box. He's been playing some man, playing really well. I think PFF had a graphic about him in the last 3 weeks, having like 73 coverage snaps and not allowing a completion or something like that. Just good work from him, good development. And that sack that he had today, I think, that we mentioned earlier, that kind of gives Mike Macdonald a little bit more of an idea of, oh, this guy's got some length. He's got some speed. Maybe start using him as one of these edge rushers or as a rusher on blitz packages more often, because, you're also comfortable with his speed if he needs to turn back and drop into a zone, if he's simulating pressure. So I felt like it was a really strong performance from him. And one of the times where he's starting to pop for me a little bit.
Yeah, Kyle Hamilton's definitely a little bit of an weird player to talk about because he is so. You mentioned how long he is. That's the first thing that everybody talks about, that I talked about when I was scouting him when he was in college, was that this dude is unbelievably long, and his length that he has when he tackles is that it's unbelievable and something I've never seen from a safety before. Like, he tackles like I don't know like how like he almost has like unlimited range when he tackles. And obviously it's like I know he's had some little bit of an issue wrapping up. I know the missed tackles have certainly been there. You know, they've come up a little bit, but again, like you mentioned, he's been playing a lot better. Been using a little bit of a different role than I think we would have really some of us expected. I didn't really see him as a free safety, so that's definitely a little bit. That's definitely not surprising that they're not using him in that role. But you know, it's fun to see him get ways to get on the field. We knew he wasn't going to be an every down starter when they drafted him. We knew that having Chuck Clark and signing Marcus Williams, he wasn't going to be an every down starter. We knew that like they were going to have to get creative with how they're using him. I think they are doing they're doing their best to get him involved. I would hope as the season goes on, we see more of it as he gets more comfortable with the scheme, like you mentioned. Maybe we do see him more on blitzes. Maybe we do see him on the edges. Like that was where a lot of the splash plays came in college, was that he was just the guy on the edge. And you know, either then he would drop back. Remember, he had a play against Cincinnati where Desmond Ridder tries to hit a screen in the flat, and Kyle Hamilton's right there, and he just jumps up and knocks the ball down. Like use those pterodactyl arms that he has, and that wicked range that he has to his advantage. Like it's going to take a smart mind to really use him. That's why I loved the pick so much when it happened, because I knew the Ravens were going to have a role for him this year. So you know, like you mentioned, it's a little bit hard to find somebody for this award because the free agents have just been seemingly dropping like flies. And yeah, I'll give it to Kyle Hamilton. He's kind of had a little bit of a rough start. Obviously, we remember the Dolphin game a lot, week 2, his second game of his career, where he kind of just doesn't have it and makes a lot of mental mistakes. We're not seeing those mental mistakes now. We're seeing him get more comfortable with the defense, and it's fun to see, man.
Yeah, I think what you said about them having kind of a plan and a role for him in mind, I think that's kind of it was seen as a luxury pick. Like, oh, they've got Marcus Williams and Chuck Clark, and they've got Geno Stone and Tony Jefferson. And, you know, why did they draft Kyle Hamilton? I think it's the long term. It's thinking, what can Kyle Hamilton be for us? You know, you think about adding weapons on offense, and the Ravens are like, okay, well, I'm going to start adding weapons on defense. Guys like Bowser, guys like Hamilton, who are physically really impressive and mentally very versatile as players, is where you can apply them, are rare. And so the Ravens, I love what you said about pterodactyl arms. I can guarantee you I'm going to steal that at some point, because that's one of the other things that really stands out about Hamilton is his length. And that comes in coverage for sure when he's, you know, patrolling the field, but it also comes into play near the line of scrimmage, like you said, when he's able to get into passing windows and create havoc. So yeah, I'm really encouraged by this game. This next award is going to be pretty quick. It's Gus the Bus. He's back, and he's Gus. We talked about it earlier. You know, I think he was on a pitch count. His carries went down. His carries and snaps went down significantly in the fourth quarter. I think he was definitely on a pitch count with an eye towards Thursday, which is completely understandable given the way injuries have gone with this team. But yeah, a lot of credit to him. Ronnie Stanley had a pretty good game. Wasn't as dominant. Didn't really get the chance to go up against Myles Garrett as much as I would have wanted to see that matchup. And he's always worth a mention as a comeback guy. But there's no one here to mention but Gus Edwards. I mean, he came back and played. I think he played more than I honestly expected him to.
Yeah, another comeback I do want to mention is Justin Houston. Came back from injuries, had a couple of really big sacks. I think he's already tied his sack production in like 3 games and 3 or 4 games. And he had his whole entire year last year. So he's been playing much better than I think I'd ever thought he was. I thought he was a good player, but I didn't think he was going to be a big time sack production guy. He's been playing with a little bit more extra juice this year, but again, like it's got to go to Gus. It's like we're not fooling anybody by saying it's anybody but Gus.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Houston though, because 2 sacks and just 16 snaps is really impressive. He is an all-time pass rusher. Like I think that it gets overshadowed because he doesn't have the postseason success. He doesn't have the accolades, and he's just not that. He's kind of in the middle of generations. like he played with Suggs, but Suggs was, I think he came into the league a little bit after Suggs, and now there's all the young pass rushers. He's weirdly kind of closer to Khalil Mack's generation, even though it feels like Houston is a lot older and has been around a lot longer than Mack. But Houston's an all-timer, man. And the way that he leads this team, the way he leads this edge group, they play differently with him on. It just feels different with him on the field versus not, especially the edge group. It just feels like they've got their dad there or something on the field with them, and they're trying to win and impress him because he is that guy to that group of players. And so I'm glad you brought him up because he is so good, and he doesn't get nearly the credit that he should. Which actually goes and brings me. We can jump around a little bit here. Now that we're mentioning Houston, he was one of the main guys I had for Unsung Hero, just because of the difference he makes on this defense, the way they play, how intelligently they play with him on the field, and the fact that he's just good. I mean, he's just so good at getting to quarterbacks. He's so good at setting up blockers with his moves and structuring them. A couple of the other guys I want to shout out as unsung heroes. Geno Stone, we mentioned, and his ability to just slide in as that deep coverage safety for Marcus Williams has been really impressive. He showed it a little bit last year and in the preseason, but again, doing that against starting offenses in a tough defense, when arguably you are the player on the team with the least proven on the starting defense with the least proven as a player, and just shows up, does his job every week. You can tell that the defense is really behind him emotionally. They're close with Geno. I mean, I've seen him and Marlon Humphrey out in Baltimore a few times, and it just seems like they're really close with Geno. And so, again, that feeling that's on the defense right now is a really positive one. Who else did you have as an unsung player this week? Unsung hero, I should say.
Ooh, unsung hero. Well, I know Kenyon Drake and Justice Hill outside of the obvious fumble. Unfortunately, that kind of ruins the whole entire day for Hill. Both of those guys did have pretty solid games. Nothing too flashy from both of them, but still pretty solid. Some nice runs in there. Drake obviously is not as dominant as he was against the Giants, but obviously his snaps weren't the same. He still is looking like a really good third down back. If anything, a change of pace back, someone who can give you a little bit more speed when Gus when Gus Edwards needs to hit the air mask. On defense, obviously Calais Campbell made the huge strip. Justin Houston was another one for me. Odafe Owe had a pretty solid game. It won't show up in the scorecard, unfortunately, but I do know he was a top 2 ranked Ravens defender according to PFF, which that probably means that his run grade was really well. I don't really know. I don't have those PFF numbers in front of me, but I do know he was highly ranked. Geno, as you mentioned, Kyle Hamilton's another one. Kind of had a couple of really big plays. Didn't hear Marlon Humphrey's name get called a lot yesterday. That's usually a good thing when you're a corner. There's a lot of unsung heroes, but I'm gonna go with Justin Houston, man. Coming off this injury, a couple weeks absent. I didn't think that he was going to make that huge of an impact. And I have to, come clean here. When I heard they re-signed him, I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit like, oh, here we go again with the veteran edge rushers. But he's proven me wrong. I'll stand up here and say, I'm sorry, Justin Houston. You've been much better than I've ever really could have imagined. He's playing with his hair on fire.
Yeah,
his head on fire.
He doesn't have any.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it is one of those things where you're like, okay, I guess we're just running it back with Houston, and you know what you can get out of him. But it is what he's capable of, but can he bring that? And he is. And so you mentioned Marlon too. He's been playing really well. One of the things that was talked about a lot last year, he had kind of a down year statistically. Part of that was because he was getting asked to do a lot of different things, having to do a ton on that defense. And this year, he's just really locked in on his job and his role. He's driving on tackles. He's all over plays. I feel like he's also playing with his head on fire, and is getting some laurels for it, but still not enough. I think he's putting together like a legit all-pro season. We could go over to head scratcher of the week. this is, usually saved for coaching and ref decisions. There are a few I want to highlight. We already talked about the run game, so I don't think we need to get into that again. But a few things I wanted to highlight. One, the lack of usage of Devin Duvernay. Greg Roman talking about the exclamation point next to his name last week, and then not using him enough this week, even when Duvernay was asked to be a decoy, was asked to be a key blocker. He was all over it, and it's disappointing to see. From a coaching, referee, decision-making standpoint, Stefanski's challenge was really strange. That was odd. And I feel like the refs missed a very clear roughing the passer call, Jadeveon Clowney pulling Lamar Jackson down after the play. But I think the real award for head scratcher of the week just goes to the ref, clock management this whole game, when the clock stopped versus when it didn't. That field goal rolling all the way to the 2-minute warning. I guess because it's blocked, the clock is supposed to run until the ball stops moving, but there were players running on the field, and so it should have been stopped then. It's just a lot of confusion, the false start in there. And so I think a lot of that end of sequence, we were just trying to figure out what the heck was going on.
Yeah, the refs certainly played their role in the game. I know Browns fans were complaining on Twitter that hey, it's not a false start. Look at the tape. It was clearly a false start. I don't want to hear it. A couple of other plays that I think were head scratchers. I feel like every week Marcus Peters gets a hanky thrown his way. I understand he's a physical dude. I understand that sometimes it's different refereeing crews, but it's frustrating when a slight hand in the opposite direction will get Peters flagged. Meanwhile, you turn on red zone and you look in the other direction, and you look down in Colorado, and Sauce Gardner is mugging Cortland Sutton down the sideline on a key fourth down, and there's no flag. So again, nothing to do with the Ravens, but it just frustrates me with the inconsistency with the refs. It feels like they're always against the Ravens. It's always against the Ravens with their stupid penalties. And sometimes you gotta feel for the Ravens players because they're always against them. There's always some kind of weird is that really true or not? Penalty against them. The Geno Stone penalty really got me angry. That ball was not catchable. Jacoby Brissett was throwing that ball away, and they still threw I think it was pass interference. I'm pretty sure it was pass interference. No, that ball was clearly not catchable to, I think it was Donovan Peoples-Jones against Marlowe. But a couple of head scratchers of the week for that. Head scratcher of the week, for me, again, the refs, the bad calls, the bad hankies. That's definitely something that, it's kind of uncontrollable, but, maybe they could do a little bit more to control it. Maybe they could, not play so physical, but Marcus Peters is a physical corner. So what do you want him to do?
Yeah. It is tough, and the inconsistency is tough. I do think Peters needs to adjust the way he plays a little bit because it is getting called on him a lot. He's got to recognize that and make an adjustment somehow. That being said, I didn't feel like the refs were as bad in this game as they have been earlier this season. I feel like there were some things that went the Ravens' way and some things that went the Browns' way, and that I'm fine with. When it's back and forth and things go back and forth, that's fine. Even when they miss calls, they miss that rough in the passer, they miss something somewhere else. It felt like it overall evened out at the end of the game. It's just frustrating that we have to rely on that. Last award before we look ahead to next week's matchup is the Breakout Player of the Week. And I do feel like we've talked about a lot of guys already. I do want to mention the 2020, the Young Bulls is what I'm going to keep calling them until somebody tells me that's not a good nickname for him. But Justin Madubuike and Bradford Washington, again, just holding down that interior. I felt like especially in the pass rush, these interior linemen are getting asked to do a lot of different things, a lot of stunts and twists in the pass rush. And I feel like Madubuike especially is doing a really great job taking advantage of that. The other guy, I guess he's not. I guess this isn't so much a breakout as an unsung hero, but I just want to get Patrick Mekari another shout out coming in to stabilize the line at right tackle after they took Moses out in the fourth quarter. He is just so valuable to this team, consistently proves his value game after game, comes in, does whatever he's asked, does well, and just doesn't get talked about. I feel like he should be on national news, like national sports talk once or twice a season for basically making sixth offensive lineman a starting position in the NFL. And I think that's a trend we're going to start to see. I think teams are going to see the way guys like him, the Packers drafted Zach Tom, another really versatile offensive lineman. I think they're going to realize that having a sixth lineman who can slot in, at least having a guy who can play both center and tackle, the two hardest positions, O-line positions to back up, is so huge that it is literally worth another starting position the way slot receiver, slot corner have become starting positions in the NFL. So I can't say enough about him. Looking into next week, seeing this comment from Raven76 Be More. Thanks for tuning in again. It's great to have you. I think this is a big expectation the Ravens have going into this game against the Bucs, but I'm going to temper it a little bit because it's a short week and it's an away week, and that's always tough. You're also facing a very angry Tom Brady who could only muster 3 points in his last game. And while I do think the Bucs are at a very weak point as a team and as an organization, it's always tough to know whether you're going to be able to take advantage of that or whether that is going to be extra motivation and you happen to be the nearest opponent, the nearest target for them to take out their frustration on and have a good game. And so I'm cautiously optimistic about how bad the Bucs look and how I think we can exploit that, especially how we can get pressure on Brady defensively and hopefully win the game on that side of the ball without having to rely on the offense too much. But Jared, what are you looking for in this next game?
Like you kind of mentioned, I do want to dive into the tape and really see where Brady's making mistakes. I do know that a lot of the Bucs' offensive woes are not Brady's fault. I do know that. Mike Evans had that horrific drop. Oh my gosh, that was such a bad drop he had. Leonard Fournette just is one of the worst running backs I've ever seen with vision. Like, he literally cannot see holes. Like, he literally has no vision. So the run blocking is not the best. I know that I follow a couple of Bucs reporters. Obviously, like the most famous one is Trevor Sikkema. He's been on Twitter. He's been talking a lot about some of their guard issues, center issues. They're hoping to get Ryan Jensen back, former Raven, at some point this year. We don't know when that's going to be.
That was good news. Yeah, that was surprising. I love Ryan Jensen. It was great to see he was going to come back.
Yeah, that's really fantastic to see it's going to come back, But they have something weird's going on in Tampa. Something is in the water, just like, and to kind of put this on the table, I wasn't the biggest fan of giving, what is their head coach's name?
Todd Bowles.
Yeah, Todd Bowles, another shot in the NFL. He was horrific with the Jets when he was a head coach. He was so bad. And now it's like Bruce Arians retires, and it's like, well, we're just going to hand off the reins to this dude who was a failed head coach. I know he does a lot with the defense, but guys are just playing out of position on defense. Devin White apparently has been getting rocked in the run game. He's apparently been one of the most overrated, one of the worst graded players in PFF in terms of just being consistently out of position. He's been one of the most overrated. Apparently, according to many people who watched the games, he's been one of the more overrated players this year. But he's a really good blitzer. Obviously, you got to watch out for Levante David, one of the best most underappreciated players in NFL history, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Tremendous guy against the pass, makes everything easier on that defense. The corners are hurt. Antoine Winfield Jr. just got placed on the concussion protocol. He might be their best defensive player. He will not be playing against the Ravens this game. Bucs are banged up. Tom Brady is angry. This almost has the feeling of a trap game. I am not saying that, though. I'm not,
because how can it be a trap game when you're playing Brady and the Bucs? It messes with your mind. You're like, what is this team I'm playing? Because it's almost like the Ravens themselves. You know what this team should be and should be capable of, and it's just there is just something missing, and it's tough because I feel like it's happening across the entire league. Scoring is down. Quarterbacks are not looking as good. Anyone not named Patrick Mahomes is just not looking as good as they did last year. Josh Allen is looking pretty good, but he didn't look that great against Baltimore, for example. And it just feels like defenses have really, really caught up. And for a team like the Bucs, and for Brady, who relies on his knowledge and expertise with defenses throwing tougher things at him. I don't know what it is, because his arm is still there. He's still making some good throws. That deep bomb that Evans dropped, he had a laser to Evans in the middle of the game, in the middle of the field. It's weird, and it's a weird time to be playing them. It's weird to be playing them on a Thursday night right after this loss. Like you're saying, it has the feeling of a trap game, but it can't be a trap game because it's Brady, and it is just a strange feeling going into this game.
Yeah, and if anybody thinks it's a trap game, let me remind you what happened the last time the Ravens went to Florida and they thought they had a trap game. We didn't turn out that well. That was the Miami Dolphins game last year. Let's hope it doesn't turn into that disaster. But yeah, it's going to be interesting with this game. The Bucs, even with all their injuries, are insanely talented. This is still one of the most talented teams in football, but I think, as Trevor Sikkema said on Twitter, no team in the NFL is doing less with more. Mm-hmm. It just feels like that their coaches and their players are coaches are not putting them in the correct position in terms of just playing the wrong players at certain spots, and the players are not executing. And it's just frustrating. There's a lot of frustration going on. Brady's angry. Ravens have, I'm not going to say they've owned Brady, but they've always sort of historically kind of had good games against Brady. There have been times when Brady's gotten his against the Ravens, but Harbaugh always kind of seems to get his teams really prepared for Brady. We'll see how this goes on the short week. Obviously, Ravens didn't really have a true workout today. It was more of a walk-in. That injury report, though, should mention, looked pretty big, but apparently it wasn't accurate because it was just a walk-in. We'll see more of it tomorrow. We'll see more if some of these injuries are real, but there were some big names on that injury report.
Yeah, they're also just being super cautious with these injuries, which is, a smart move, a move I respect from them. I think it's the right thing to do. But that being said, it is another thing to mention that the loss of rhythm and the loss of practice time aren't unrelated. And so, I don't really care that guys missed a Monday walkthrough. That is not a big deal to me. But, Mark Andrews not practicing at all last week and then not having a catch or a yard. Now, do I think that has to do with the Browns game plan more than it does his practice time? Sure. But it also does take away your ability to just be in the feel of what the exact game plan is with the team. And, they'll find that they'll continue to work out that balance to being cautious with their injured players and making sure they're back to 100% before they're on the field, but still keeping them in the mix. Clearly a guy like Houston doesn't need to practice, right? Because he's making plays on 5 snaps or whatever you give him. But, I really agree with what you're saying. It's really going to make me think differently about this game. It's a weird time to be playing the Bucs. It's a talented team that just seems to be getting in their own way, even more arguably than the Ravens have been. And I think it'll just be a really interesting game to watch these two teams at this time in the season, at this stage in their franchises, go up against each other. Jared, I didn't have any other major takeaways from yesterday's game other than it was an ugly win, but they came out with the win, and they're 4-2, 2-0 in the division, top of the AFC North. And I think that's about as much as you can ask for right now.
Yeah, 4-3, by the way, but
4-3, yeah, too optimistic.
Division's not looking as hot right now, man. Cincinnati's also 4-3, but remember they have 2 losses in the division. Mm-hmm. They have losses against the Steelers and the Ravens that messes them up. Steelers lost a really disgusting game on Sunday Night Football, absolutely nasty game. They dropped 5 interceptions by Tua. Kenny Pickett looked awkward. The team is just out of sync for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Something is not going right with that team. Something is just not going right. Bengals put up a lot of points, but I went back and looked at it. Someone on Twitter mentioned this. Falcons secondary were out. So he was going up against practice squad players. Joe Burrow putting up a ton of points against practice squad players. Wow. Not gonna make a comment about that. But
we've heard that one before.
Yeah. As someone on Twitter has said, where have I seen that before? But and then of course the Browns here, their season just looks in the wash. 2-5, just no rhythm, no consistency. couple drives that looked good on offense when Jacoby Brissett didn't have to do anything and sat back and watched Nick Chubb break a million tackles. Defense looked pretty good on some drives, but again, not so much on others. They're hurt to unbelief. Apparently, Kareem Hunt and Greedy Williams might be available through trade. So the division is looking a little bit wide open right now, man. It's looking like the Ravens are the clear shot favorite to get out of this division. If they can just get out of this division, man, if they can just get out of like this tough stretch. And like after this, we do have a pretty okay stretch coming up. We got a long break after this because we got a short week coming off of a bye. So that means we got a long break. I think the next game after this is the Saints. I think, sure. Back to back.
Yeah, yep. It's the Bucks on Thursday night, and then not the following Monday, obviously, but the Monday after. It's the Saints game in New Orleans. Monday Night Football, another primetime matchup, 2 weeks in a row. So they're really spotlight's going to be on Lamar and probably the offense, and we'll see how they do. I agree. I think they're in pole position for the division. The Bengals look good. They look resurgent. They look like they're figuring things out. But again, are they going to be able to beat the cover two that's getting thrown at them and seems to lock them up every time when it's done by a disciplined, talented defense? We'll see. They'll have more tests of that. Obviously, we're going to play them again this season, and I'm sure we're going to throw a lot of the same stuff at them. Jared, thank you so much for joining me. It was such a pleasure to have you on the pod, and we certainly would like you to join again sometime soon. Thanks so much, and thanks so much for everyone tuned in.